Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're taking what could be just a dry historical account and treating it for what it is. A real-time story of high-stakes political and personal drama. We are diving headfirst into the story of Cambyses, the powerful king of Persia, and his invasion of Egypt. This starts as a calculated military move, but it spirals into something much, much darker. We're looking at a conflict driven by deep-seated grudges, ambition, and a level of paranoia that brings an entire empire to the edge. The targets are King Amasis of Egypt and later his son Simonides.
And that's exactly our mission. We want to trace the fuse from the very beginning, that initial spark of personal vendetta that, somehow ignites a global conflict. We're going to follow the causes, the absolutely horrifying execution of the war, and the psychological fallout that saw this vast empire's resources basically squandered by a man who was, by all accounts, consumed by rage and what everyone around him was calling madness.
Okay, so let's get right into it. To really understand why Cambyses points his entire military machine at Egypt, we can't start with borders or strategy. We have to start with something, well, almost petty. A physician.
A physician. It all begins with Cambyses asking King Amasis for his daughter's hand in marriage.
Which sounds like a standard political move.
It sounds like it, but it was a perfectly engineered trap, both politically and emotionally. And the person who sprung that trap was an Egyptian physician who had a colossal personal vendetta against his own king, Amasis.
A physician? I mean, why would a doctor have that kind of grudge against his own ruler?
It comes down to forced servitude, really. Cyrus, who was Cambyses' father, had asked Amasis to send him the best eye doctor in all of Egypt.
A reasonable request between kings?
You'd think so. But Amasis complied by choosing a man and sending him to Persia completely against his will. He was torn away from his wife, his children, and so this physician, now in the Persian court, spends his time just plotting revenge.
So Amasis, in a single act, creates the one person with the perfect motive and, I assume, the perfect position to bring him down.
Absolutely. The doctor was smart. He knew the inner workings of both courts, Egyptian and Persian, and he specifically counseled Cambyses to demand Amasis' daughter because he knew it would hurt Amasis no matter what he did.
How so?
Well, think about it. If Amasis says yes, he's humiliated. He has to give up his daughter knowing she'll probably be a mistress, not a queen in the powerful Persian court.
Right.
But if he refuses...
He makes an enemy of the most powerful man in the world.
Exactly. It's a vicious, perfect, no-win situation.
So Amasis is caught. He's got overwhelming fear of Persia on one side and the dishonor of sending his daughter on the other. What does he do?
He chooses deception, and this is where a really key character comes into the story. A woman named Herodotus.
Okay.
Amasis decides not to send his own daughter. Instead, he finds this very tall, very fair young woman who was, and this is the crucial part, the daughter of Apries, the former king. The very same. The king whom Amasis himself and other Egyptians had rebelled against and killed. So he dresses up Herodotus, the daughter of his slain master, as his own and sends her off to Persia.
That is an unbelievable risk, trying to fool the king of Persia with a stand-in bride.
Yeah.
So how does Herodotus react when she gets there? Does she play along?
Not for a second. She sees her moment, and it's not just for survival. It's for ultimate dynastic revenge.
So she uses the situation.
Completely. The moment Cambyses greets her as Amasis' daughter, she exposes the whole lie. She says it plainly, something like, "King, you don't know how Amasis has deceived you. I am really the daughter of his master Apries."
Wow. That's not just a correction, that's an accusation.
It's a daughter of a slain king, using her position as a kind of Trojan horse to strike back at the man who killed her father and took the throne. It was personal.
So this one act of deception, born from a doctor's spite and revealed by a daughter's quest for revenge, becomes the immediate justification for a massive invasion.
It gives Cambyses the perfect emotional impetus. The deceit infuriates him, and it gives him the, let's say, moral justification he needs to launch the campaign.
We should probably mention that the Egyptians, after the fact, tried to rewrite this a bit, didn't they?
Oh, they did. They tried to claim Cambyses as one of their own. Their version says that Cambyses was actually the son of Apries' daughter, Herodotus, making him part Egyptian royalty.
A way to save face.
Of course, but the source material just dismisses this outright. It points out that the Egyptians knew full well that Persian law forbids a bastard son from ruling if a lawful heir exists. It was a pretty transparent attempt to claim kinship with the house of Cyrus and soften the blow of being conquered.
But there's a more chilling piece of evidence for Cambyses' personal motivation, and it comes from his childhood.
This is where you see the real psychological driver, the oath. There's the scene where Cassandain, Cambyses' real mother, is feeling bitter because Cyrus is honoring the new Egyptian arrival, Herodotus. And as Cassandain is voicing this pain, her 10-year-old son, Cambyses, is listening. And he makes this solemn, frankly terrifying vow.
What does he say?
He says, "Then, mother, when I am grown a man, I will turn all Egypt upside down."
A promise made as a 10-year-old, fueled by his mother's pain, becomes the foreign policy of an empire.
It confirms that Herodotus' deception wasn't the only reason for the invasion. It was just the perfect trigger. It allowed him to fulfill this deep-seated filial promise he'd made years before. This whole thing is about settling scores.
So the psychological stage is set. But let's put the rage aside for a second and talk about logistics. Cambyses still has to get a massive army across a huge waterless desert to even reach Egypt.
And that's where another crucial figure appears, a man named Phanes, a Halicarnassian mercenary.
Another person with a grudge, I'm guessing.
Amasis seems to have a real talent for making powerful enemies. Phanes was highly regarded, valiant in war, but he had developed his own grudge and fled Egypt.
And Amasis didn't want to let him go.
Not at all. He chased him zealously, sending his best men. Because Phanes wasn't just a good soldier, he had an exact knowledge of all Egyptian matters. He knew their military, their supply lines. He was essentially a walking intelligence dossier.
A living map to his own country.
Exactly. And Phanes managed to escape, gets his guards drunk, classic move, and makes his way to Cambyses, who is struggling with this exact problem, the desert.
And Phanes' advice isn't about battle tactics, is it? It's about survival.
Purely. He lays out the route from Phanes through Herodotus, what we'd call Gaza, and then to the Serbonian Marsh.
But the real killer is the stretch between Ionisus and the marsh. The sources call it wondrous waterless, a 3-day journey that could destroy an army before it even sees an enemy.
That was the choke point. And Phanes knew the only way through was to get help from the king of the Arabians who controlled that territory.
And it's interesting, the sources show us that this wasn't a new problem. There was already a kind of water infrastructure in place, right?
Yes, which is a fascinating detail. We learned that jars of Greek and Phoenician wine were brought into Egypt twice a year, and the local governors had this rule. They had to collect all those empty pots, fill them with Nile water at Memphis, and then transport them back to the dry lands of Syria.
So the wine trade had accidentally created a water supply line.
It proves the scale of the challenge. But for an entire army, they needed a massive, immediate supply. And that depended entirely on the Arabian king.
And this agreement wasn't just a handshake deal. It was sealed with a very serious ritual.
The Arabians took their pledges incredibly seriously. The ritual involved a man cutting the palms of both parties with a sharp stone, smearing the blood on 7 other stones, and calling on their gods Dionysus and the heavenly Aphrodite to witness the pact.
A sacred binding oath.
Deeply. And the Arabian king delivered. He filled up countless camel skins with water and drove them out into the desert to create water depots, just waiting for Cambyses' army to arrive.
That one act of cooperation was basically the key that unlocked the invasion of Egypt.
Without it, the whole campaign might have died in the sand. There's another, less believable story about a huge pipeline made of oxides, but the camel skins make the most sense.
So the desert is crossed. The army is at the gates of Egypt. But the man at the center of all this, Amasis, is gone. He died after a 44-year reign.
A reign of good fortune that ran out at the worst possible moment. His son, Samanitis, inherits the throne and an invasion.
And there's a bad omen right away.
A very strange one. Rain fell at Thebes, a place where, according to the locals, it had never rained before or since. It was seen as a profoundly unsettling sign.
But before the battle even starts, we get another act of personal vengeance. This time, it's against the traitor Phanes.
The foreign mercenaries in the Egyptian army, the Greeks and Catorians, were absolutely furious with Phanes for leading this invasion. They wanted to punish him, and they chose a really shocking ritualistic way to do it.
This part is hard to even comprehend. They use his children.
Phanes had left his sons behind in Egypt, so the soldiers bring them out to the camp in full view of their father. They place a large bowl between the two armies.
Oh, then?
They bring the boys out one by one and cut their throats over the bowl. After they're all dead, they pour wine and water into the mixture. And the foreign soldiers, all of them, drink from it before going into battle.
My God. It's kind of dark communion, binding themselves together with the blood of the traitor's family.
It's an act of ultimate commitment. There's no turning back after that. And despite that, that dark energy, the battle was incredibly hard fought. Many fell on both sides. But in the end, the Egyptians broke and fled to Memphis.
After the battle, we get this bizarre, almost clinical observation about the skulls of the dead soldiers.
Yeah, it's a really strange digression. The narrator pauses to note that the skulls of the Persians were brittle. You could pierce one with a small pebble. The Egyptian skulls, on the other hand, were incredibly strong. You could barely break them with a stone.
And there's a cultural explanation for this.
According to the locals, yes. The Egyptians shaved their heads from childhood, and the constant exposure to the sun supposedly thickened the skull bone. As a side effect, they claimed, very few Egyptians went bald.
Yeah, the Persians.
The Persians wore their felt hats, their tiaras, all the time, sheltering their heads, so their skulls were weaker. It's this small detail that shows how a simple cultural habit could have a direct physical impact on the battlefield.
So the Egyptians are routed, they flee to Memphis, and the siege begins. And right away, the Egyptians commit a shocking act of brutality.
Cambyses does the conventional thing. He sends a herald on a ship, a Greek ship from Mytilene, to offer terms of surrender. It's standard procedure.
But the Egyptians weren't interested in procedure.
Not at all. They saw the ship, swarmed out from the walls, and just destroyed it. They tore the crew limb from limb like butchers and carried the pieces back into the city.
They slaughtered diplomats. That's a line you just don't cross.
It guarantees there will be no mercy. And sure enough, Memphis falls. The fear from that fall is so great that neighboring peoples, the Libyans, the people of Cyrene and Barca, they all surrender immediately.
Cambyses' reaction to their surrender gifts is telling.
Very. He accepts the gifts from the Libyans, but when Cyrene sends what he considers a paltry some 500 silver minae, he just grabs the coins and scatters them among his soldiers in disgust. His volatility is already showing.
Which brings us to this incredible, calculated psychological test of the captured king Samanitis. This isn't just about punishment, is it?
No, this is theater. It's a deliberate staging designed for maximum humiliation. 10 days after the city falls, he sits Samanitis down in the suburbs to force him to watch the complete destruction of his world.
And the first test involves his daughter.
Yes. His daughter is dressed as a slave and sent out with other noble girls to fetch water. All the Egyptian fathers watching this start weeping and wailing. But Samanitis, he just sees it, understands what's happening, and bows his head to the ground in silence.
He refuses to give Cambyses the satisfaction.
He shows this immense, almost unnatural control, and then comes the second test, which is even more brutal. His son.
What happens to him?
His son is led out with 2,000 other young Egyptian men, ropes around their necks, bits in their mouths like animals. They're being led to their execution.
An execution with a specific, grim logic to it.
Atonement. 10 noble Egyptians for every one of the Mytilenean crew that was torn apart. And again, all the Egyptians are crying out in Greece, but Samanitis, just silence. He sees his heir walking to his death and just bows his head again.
He's enduring the absolute end of his dynasty with this stoic dignity.
Until the third test. And this is the one that finally breaks him.
It's not another family member, is it?
No, it's a complete curveball. An old friend of his, a companion from his court, who has lost everything and is now reduced to begging for food from the Persian soldiers, happens to walk by.
And that's the moment Samanitis breaks.
Instantly. He starts weeping loudly, striking his head, calling out his friend's name. The emotional dam just bursts.
Cambyses is baffled by this. He sends a messenger to ask, why did you weep for a beggar, but not for your own children being enslaved and executed?
And Samanitis gives this incredibly profound answer. He says, my private grief was too great for weeping, but the misfortune of my companion called for tears. He explains that his friend has lost all his wealth and is now, at the end of his life, a beggar.
So his own family's tragedy it was too big for tears. It was an epic, almost divine catastrophe. But the ruin of his friend was a human-scale tragedy he could actually grieve.
Exactly. And that answer, that piece of wisdom, actually moves Cambyses. The source is Croesus, who was there, and the other Persians wept. And Cambyses felt pity. He immediately sends an order to save both Samanitis and his son.
But it's too late for the son.
Tragically, yes. The son had been the first one killed in the execution. But Samanitis is brought before Cambyses and treated with kindness. And the thinking was, he might even have been made governor of Egypt. The Persians had a custom of honoring defeated kings' sons.
If he had just accepted his fate?
If he had just minded his own business. But he failed that final test. He was caught plotting evil, trying to raise a revolt among the Egyptians.
And that was the end for him.
A swift and final end. Cambyses forced him to drink bull's blood, which was believed to be a poison that would coagulate inside you. And he died right then and there.
So that's the end of the Egyptian royal line, and this is where Cambyses himself really begins his own descent, moving from calculated cruelty to something else entirely.
This is where his rage becomes truly senseless. He goes to the city of Sais, to the royal tombs, and he goes straight for the tomb of Amasis, the man who started it all.
Man he never got to face in battle.
Exactly. So he has the body dragged out and orders it to be subjected to every kind of humiliation, scourging, pulling out its hair. But the embalmed body is so well preserved, it doesn't fall apart.
And that's when he gives the order to burn it.
Which is a monumental act of sacrilege for everyone. The Persians see fire as a god. You don't defile a god by giving it a corpse. And for the Egyptians, their entire belief system is about preserving the body from being consumed by what they call the devouring beast of fire.
So he's violating the deepest religious taboos of both his own people and the people he just conquered.
It's an act of pure contempt for custom, for religion, for order itself. And from that point on, his focus just shatters. He immediately plans 3 massive military expeditions at once.
Which is never a good sign.
It's a sign of reckless overreach. He plans to go against the Carthaginians, the Carthaginians, the Ammonians in the desert oases, and the so-called long-lived Ethiopians in the south.
And that Ethiopian campaign seems to be driven by this strange legend of the Table of the Sun.
Yes, it's this almost mythical place, a meadow outside the city that's supposedly filled with roasted meat, magically replenished every night, free for anyone to eat. It speaks to Cambyses' insatiable ambition.
But his first plan, the naval attack on Carthage, fails immediately.
It does, and it fails because of a remarkable act of moral refusal. The strength of his fleet was the Phoenicians, but when he orders them to sail against Carthage, they refuse.
On what grounds?
They say they're bound by a treaty, but more importantly, that they cannot righteously attack their own sons. Carthage was a Phoenician colony.
And Cambyses has to accept that.
He has no choice. He can't force his most important naval allies. It's this fascinating moment where you see that even this supposedly absolute monarch is constrained by the customs and the power of his allies.
So, checked on the naval front, he doubles down on Ethiopia. He sends spies ahead.
He sends men who can speak the language, the fish eaters from Elephantine, and he sends them with what he thinks are impressive gifts. A purple cloak, a gold necklace, armlets, incense, a cask of palm wine.
But the Ethiopian king is not impressed.
Not in the slightest. He's described as being the tallest and fairest of all men, and he sees right through it. He knows they're spies. He calls Cambyses unrighteous for wanting to enslave people who've done him no harm.
And then he sends back one of the great messages of defiance in all of history.
The test of the bow. He hands them this enormous, powerful bow and says, "Give this to your king and tell him, when the Persians can draw a bow this great as easily as I do, then he can think about attacking the Ethiopians. Until then, he should thank the gods we have no desire to conquer his land."
It's just a perfect rebuke to Cambyses' endless ambition.
And he doesn't stop there. He mocks the gifts. The purple cloak, full of guile, he says. The gold necklace and bracelets. He laughs and says he thought they were fetters and that they have much stronger chains in Ethiopia.
The only thing he likes is the wine.
Yes, the palm wine he was vastly pleased with, which leads to this whole discussion about diet. The Persians, they learn, eat bread, which the Ethiopian king calls dung, and live to about 80.
And the Ethiopians.
They eat roasted meat and drink milk and live to 120 or even more. They attribute their longevity to a special spring whose water makes them sleeker. It's all part of this picture of a culture that is completely confident in its own superiority.
And how does Cambyses react when his spies return with this report?
He loses it. The source says he was not in his right mind, but mad. He doesn't plan, he doesn't order provisions, he just marches, forthwith. He just takes the army and heads south to the ends of the earth.
The result is immediate and catastrophic.
Before they've even gone a fifth of the way, they run out of food, they eat their pack animals, Cambyses keeps pushing them forward, then they're reduced to eating grass.
And then it gets even worse, the final moral collapse.
They reach the desert, and the starvation is so absolute that soldiers start drawing lots, and they eat 1 man out of every 10.
Cannibalism.
Cannibalism. And it's only when Cambyses hears about this that he finally realizes he's pushed them too far. He's afraid the whole army will devour itself. So he abandons the expedition and retreats to Thebes, having lost a huge number of his men.
A complete disaster born of pure rage. And what of the other army he sent out against the Ammonians?
An even stranger fate. They marched out from Thebes into the desert. They made it to the oasis, the island of the blessed. But they were never seen again.
What happened to them?
The Ammonian story is that while the army was stopped for a meal, a great and violent south wind arose and buried the entire force in sand. They just vanished.
So both of his impulsive expeditions end in total catastrophe.
Yeah.
He retreats to Memphis, defeated and humiliated.
And he arrives at the worst possible moment. The entire city of Memphis is celebrating.
Why?
Because the new Apis bull had just been revealed. To the Egyptians, this was the manifestation of a god on earth, a sacred calf. It was a time of national festival.
But Cambyses doesn't see it that way.
No. In his paranoid state, he is fully persuaded they're celebrating his military failures, that they're mocking him.
So he summons the city's rulers.
They try to explain, no, a god has appeared to us. He calls them liars and has them executed. Then he summons the priests who tell him the same story. He demands to see this tame god for himself.
So they bring him the Apis bull,
the sacred calf with all its specific markings, and Cambyses, now described as well-nigh mad, pulls out his dagger. He tries to stab it in the belly, but he misses and hits its thigh.
And then he mocks them.
Viciously. He laughs and says, "Wretched whites, are these your gods? Creatures of flesh and blood that can feel iron." He has the priests scourged and orders any Egyptian found celebrating to be killed. The wounded Apis bull dies, and the Egyptians believe it was this act, this ultimate sacrilege, that pushed Cambyses into permanent, irreparable madness.
And we see that madness turn inward immediately. He targets his own family, starting with his brother Smerdis.
He was already jealous of Smerdis because Smerdis was the only one who could even partially draw that huge Ethiopian bow. So after sending Smerdis away, Cambyses has a dream that Smerdis is on the royal throne with his head touching the sky.
A clear prophecy of usurpation in his mind.
So he immediately sends his most trusted man, Prexaspes, to murder him. Smerdis is killed, and this fratricide is seen as the first evil act of his confirmed madness.
And from his brother, he moves on to his sister, the one he had married.
An act that was already against Persian custom, and the sources give two different but equally dark stories about her death.
What's the first one?
The Greek version says she was watching a puppy help its brother fight a lion cub, and she started to weep. She told Cambyses it reminded her that there was no one left to avenge Smerdis, and for that comment, he killed her.
And the Egyptian version.
In that one, she's stripping a lettuce at dinner, leaf by leaf, and she says to him, "You have stripped the house of Cyrus as bare as this lettuce." He becomes enraged by the accusation, loops on her while she's pregnant, and she dies from the attack. It shows a total collapse of his personal and political world.
Which brings us to perhaps the most horrifying and theatrical display of his madness, the test he forces on Prexaspes, the man who killed his brother for him.
Cambyses is clearly aware his reputation is tatters. He asks Prexaspes, "What do the Persians really say about me?" And Prexaspes gives him the diplomatic but honest answer. "They praise you, but they say you love wine too well."
And this comment is the trigger for a monstrous test.
He vows to prove them wrong. He orders Prexaspes' son, who is his own cupbearer, to stand in the porch. Cambyses strings his bow, aims, and shoots the boy directly through the heart.
An act of perfect, calculated murder to prove his own sanity.
And then the psychological torture. He has the boy's body opened up. He laughs when he sees the arrow in the heart, and he turns to the grieving father, Prexaspes, and demands validation. Am I sane now?
What can a man say in that position?
Prexaspes, fearing for his own life, gives this chilling, flattering response. He says, "Master, I think that not even the god himself could shoot so true."
He validates the king's accuracy, not his sanity.
He confirms that Cambyses' power comes from this deadly, perfect precision. And the cruelty becomes completely unchecked. He buries 12 noble Persians alive, head down for some minor offense. This is when Croesus, the wise old king, tries to step in.
One last attempt to advise him.
He tries to tell him to curb his passion, that he's alienating the nobles, but Cambyses just turns on him, blaming him for bad advice he gave to his father, Cyrus. He grabs his bow to shoot Croesus.
And Croesus escapes.
He runs, and the king's attendants, knowing how volatile Cambyses is, hide Croesus instead of obeying the order to kill him.
And this leads to a final, terrible paradox.
Later, Cambyses regrets it and wishes for Croesus back. The attendants, relieved, bring Croesus out. Cambyses is glad he's alive, but then he has the attendants executed anyway for disobeying his original command.
His need for absolute obedience was more important than anything, even his own gratitude.
It's the ultimate sign of a mind that's completely lost its bearings. His final acts in Memphis are just pure contempt. He goes into temples, mocks the statues, opens ancient coffins to look at the dead. He's just desecrating everything.
He's not just trying to conquer a country anymore. He's trying to conquer belief itself.
And the sources conclude that his madness is in every way proved, because a sane man would never set himself to deride religion and custom. To attack custom, or nomos, was to attack the very fabric of civilization.
Which brings us to this powerful final argument in the source material. The idea that if you asked every nation to choose the best customs in the world, every single one would choose its own.
And to ridicule those deeply held beliefs is, by definition, madness. The source gives this perfect final anecdote to prove the point. The later king, Darius, conducts an experiment.
What does he do?
He summons some Greeks whose custom is to burn their dead. And he summons some Kalashi Indians whose custom is to eat their dead parents.
Yeah.
He asks the Greeks, "For what price would you eat your dead fathers?" And they cry out in horror that no amount of money could make them do it. Then he asks the Indians, "For what price would you burn your dead fathers?" And they cry out in horror at the very thought.
It's a perfect illustration of the power of culture. Two customs that are mutually horrifying, but absolutely sacred to the people who practice them.
That's the power of what the poet Pindar called use and wont. Custom is lord of all, and the entire story of Cambyses is about what happens when one man with absolute power decides he is above all custom, both his own and everyone else's. It leads directly to disaster.
This story is really a blueprint for how absolute power, when combined with paranoia and rage, can be totally corrupted. Every step of the way, from the physician's revenge to the striking of the Apis bull, is about the collapse of reason under the weight of an unchecked ego.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought. Given the extreme lengths Cambyses went to, shooting Praxiteles' son specifically to prove he was sane, what is the definitive line between a king exercising absolute tyrannical power and a man who is completely consumed by a mental affliction? And for the people living under that rule, does that line even matter?